You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Let's play a little game of Would You Rather, School Counselor Edition. Okay, would you rather spend your weekend planning a group or spend your afternoon sitting in irrelevant PD? Yikes. Or would you rather be the only counselor with no one to collaborate with, or to spend hours searching online for engaging activities? All of these options are pretty bad, right? But unfortunately, they're all too real. But what if I told you I had a solution for you? What if I told you I had access to hundreds of school counseling lessons, groups, and activities, counselor-specific trainings on the topics you need most, and a community of like-minded school counselors to support you? You would say, yes, please. Well, that is what Impact is all about. Impact is my monthly membership for school counselors, and it helps you with all of these things. You get access to hundreds of resources. That's unlimited free downloads. Log in and get what you need right away to every single resource that's in my store. We add new resources each and every month. We're adding a new middle school and elementary resource each month, and some of these are bonus Impact exclusives, meaning that you can get resources just for members. You can request resources that you need and easily search so you can find exactly what you're looking for. And let's talk about the trainings, counselor-specific trainings on the topics you need most. We do these each and every month as part of our Coffee with the Counselor series. Impact members get to join for absolutely free. You earn PD certificates and you get exclusive access to members-only things like the Ultimate Small Group Experience and our Summer Summit Conference. And the community. Y'all, this is possibly my favorite part of Impact. I so look forward to jumping on these calls, to getting to know counselors who are similar to me and also completely different. It's so fun to hear from your experiences and your challenges, and everyone brings a unique perspective to the table. We have an exclusive online community, and we even have a cool app where you can chat with other counselors in these community circles. We have our monthly calls, like I mentioned, twice a month, and we share wins, troubleshoot tough cases, and just talk about what it's like to be a counselor, because so often we're on our own island at our school sites. So if any of that sounds like it's for you, I would love to see you inside Impact. Go to stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/impact to solve all of your counselor problems. And I have a special offer for my listeners. Use code POD at checkout to save 10% off your first month. Okay, let's go to today's episode. Hey there, thanks for listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. Today we're continuing our series on anxiety. I thought this was just going to be a 1-month thing, but it turns out there's a huge need for this. The feedback I'm hearing from counselors is that you want more. You want to learn more strategies and find out what other counselors are doing. One of my favorite things to do is to interview counselors just like you to hear how they're implementing strategies with their own students, takeaways that they've had, advice for other counselors. I love these episodes. Today I talk with Jessica from Counseling Adventures, and she shares some of her favorite ways to teach anxiety with students, tips for parents and teachers, and advice for new school counselors. I think you're going to love this episode with Jessica. Okay, let's check it out. Hey Jessica, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to chat with you today. We are continuing to focus on anxiety on the podcast. And this was something I thought we were just going to focus on in March, but then I'm just seeing such a need for it and hearing the feedback from the counselors. So I'm like, let's do this in April too. So I can't wait
Yes.
to talk to you about it today.
Yes, definitely. I feel like um it's always been like a thing in the counseling field, but I feel like more recently, like it's one of the things I deal with the most. So yes.
Yeah, so I cannot wait I'll be talking to different counselors each week, kind of hearing different strategies and their experiences. So before we get all into that, tell us a little bit about who you are and your background.
My name's Jessica. I'm a school counselor here in Texas. I'm close to Austin, Texas, just a little bit south. And I think it's my 10th year as a school counselor. I tried to count it the other day and I was like, I think it's 10. I love what I do. I've actually been at the same school for that whole time. And I love it. I'm really happy here. I've got a, I feel like when you know you've got a good thing, you stay put. Um, and I just love working with kids. I work at the middle school level. I mostly work with my 6th graders, so they're still very elementary.
That's awesome. I love that you've been with the same school the whole time. Like, that's so great because you can start to see the kids grow up and build those relationships.
Yes, yes, even, like, sometimes siblings, I'll be like, "Your name sounds familiar," and, it was, like, maybe their sibling from, 10 years ago.
Okay, awesome. And do you have any co-counselors in your building or are you by yourself?
I do, I have one, she's amazing. I think we hired her my 3rd year here, so she's been here for 7 years now, and she's amazing. It helps to have somebody there with you because, we push each other, we inspire each other, hold each other accountable, and go to each other and say, "Hey, I've got this difficult kid. What would you do?" And even though we worked with each other for a long time, we both just have such different approaches to counseling, and it's wonderful. I don't know how some people do it when they're the only counselor. I'm like, I don't know how I could do that because she's such my big like support system.
Right. Yes, I've been the only counselor in all my experiences, and it's so hard. So it's so nice to have a teammate. Definitely.
Yes.
Who wants to have a coffee with me? It's time for our monthly Coffee with a Counselor training. April's topic: How to Teach When You're Not a Teacher, a classroom lesson survival guide. If you've ever struggled with managing classroom behaviors, figuring out what to teach in your class lessons, or figuring out how to engage students, you're going to love this topic. These are things that I used to struggle with. I've learned so much, and I cannot wait to share what I've learned with you. Remember, the Coffee with a Counselor trainings are free for Impact members. If you're an Impact member, you get this month and every single month's training included in your membership. But if you're not, we would love for you to join us. For the price of your daily Starbucks run, about $10, you can join our Coffee with the Counselor training. Included is a PD certificate and a fun freebie. Again, that's How to Teach When You're Not a Teacher, a classroom lesson survival guide. Go to stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/coffee to save your seat. I can't wait for our coffee date. See you there. So let's chat about anxiety today. You've been saying you've seen an increase in referrals these last few years. But what's something you would want parents and teachers to know about anxiety?
Um, I think one thing is just like some basic strategies, like in the moment strategies for teachers and parents, so that we can maybe help the anxiety when it's not like crippling anxiety, when it's just kind of beginning in kids. And there's so many things just in the classroom, just kind of how you talk it out with kids that I think could really help. Um, let's see. I think also another thing, I met with a parent just last week about anxiety, and something I think that was missing was just this concept that anxiety, like it looks different in everyone. And how we look at it, it's different. And so I had these two parents, and the dad was like, my kid's manipulating us. This is just manipulation. And the mom was like, no, it's anxiety and we need to do this. And I was like, it's kind of both. I said, when anxiety just looks different, and when you're super nervous about a situation, you'll do anything to avoid it. I said, it's not like this evil manipulation your kid's doing. I said, they're trying to not face, their fear. They're trying to walk away from it, and so I think just understanding how it can look. And I think talking as parents, they're both kind of like, because I guess the parents have been arguing about it together. And so then I think they're both like, oh, we're both right. Like we're
Right.
not.
Yeah.
I think they wanted me to tell them that one of them was right and one was wrong. And I think it's just that anxiety can look very different. It's not always the crying. It's not always, it can look different in different ages and different kids.
Mhm.
Um, and I think one other thing I would wish that educators and parents would know is just that everyone's reality is different. And so what feels real to a fifth grader or sixth grader makes them nervous. That's real to them, you know, um, and it may not make sense to us adults. We might be like, that doesn't make any sense. I had a girl tell me recently she's afraid of Christmas because she's afraid of opening gifts. She's
Mm.
afraid of like people's reactions when like if she doesn't like their gift or um and so I think just understanding like that's very real to her, right? It doesn't make sense to me, but it's very real to her, and just accepting that we don't have to understand it. We just have to acknowledge how they're feeling.
I love that. I actually know some adults who are like that, who I love presents.
I
I
know,
like
me too.
But I know some people who I've actually had a few adults tell me that they're like, I don't want to open presents in front of people. Like I've been at a birthday party or a wedding shower or something where they're like, let's just put all the gifts on the table and we'll open them later. And I like love to watch people open the gift I bought them, and to see their,
Yes.
but that can be stressful.
Yes. I
Yeah,
know
but
it shocked me. I was like, you don't want to, you want to hide? And she was like, yes. She's like, and I thought maybe because she was a center of attention. And she was like, no, she goes, I think if my face doesn't show happy, then they'll be mad. It was just right. I hadn't even thought of that before. So, just very interesting. Yeah, I love gifts. I'd be like, yoo-hoo, yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I would love to hear. We have a lot of elementary counselors who listen. Let's say majority elementary. So I love that you're middle because they can kind of see like what's to come, and kind of prep the kids. So I'd love to know like what are the top things your students are anxious about? Do you see any trends in your students, or is everyone pretty different?
Um, I do have a lot of kids that are nervous to come to school. And I actually, most of those kids, when we sit down and really talk about it, it's much more separation anxiety than it is school. Um, so I do have a lot of, and then some kids it is like I'm nervous about a test. Um, and that I kind of get a lot of those kids, their parents might keep them home and then to like try and help, but then that just increases the anxiety for when we return. Um, avoiding, if I always tell people like avoiding what makes you anxious doesn't actually help the anxiety. It actually just kind of increases it. We're not learning to cope. We can't avoid those things forever. Um, so yeah, I do have kids afraid to come to school, afraid to leave parents, and much more like afraid of like my mom, something might happen to my mom while I'm at school. Things like that. And then I do just have like some social anxiety in groups. I don't know how to talk to people, or I don't know what to say or how to make friends, because I feel like sixth grade, that's a big thing, is your friends start becoming kind of like your major support system in middle school and high school. And so there's that shift from I used to go to my mom for everything, and now I start going to my friends. And so how to navigate situations that they do get some anxiety about that. Um, I
I love
think
that you brought up the separation anxiety because I feel like so often we think of that with like kindergarten or first, right? Like their first time leaving their parents. But that's so interesting that that's still a reoccurring thing that you're seeing in middle school as well.
yes, I am. I mean, even just a few weeks ago, I had a parent call the front office and ask if I could go out to the car. It happens, and I remember being shocked by it my first year at middle school. I was like, What do you mean? Like the kid won't get out of the car? What do you like? I don't understand." And because my mom's a kindergarten teacher, and so she talks a lot about, like, oh yeah, my kindergartners. And so I do every year. I feel like I have like maybe like five kids that they just don't want to leave parents. And so that's always difficult. It's trying to talk them through that and help them out. But it's similar techniques to what you guys do in kindergarten. I do
Right,
the same thing. So it's just at a different age level.
right. And when you are working with students one on one or in a group on anxiety, what kind of strategies do you like to use?
I like to focus on like CBT. So I do what I call the three C's with kids. Because now that I feel like when kids hit middle and high school, they're at the point where they're kind of maturing. And so the anxiety really is so much based on their thoughts processes. And so I feel like those have to be addressed. And so the three C's, it's like where we talk about catching their thought. Um, and I teach them cognitive distortions, but I call them, in a kid term, I call them thinking errors or thinking mistakes. And I kind of walk them through them and I say, everybody does these, but which ones do you feel like you struggle with the most? And they can almost always I'd say they correctly identify them because I kind of know where they're at, and then they do a pretty good job. And sometimes they surprise me. I'll be like, oh, I didn't think of that, explain that to me. So I teach them that because I also believe in like educating them on like this is what these are. So after I kind of teach them like, hey, the first thing I want you to do is to catch these, to recognize when you're doing it. And the second thing we're going to do is the second C is to check them. And so just going through like, what is the we go through like just some questions, just like counseling questions, really. So I'll ask them, like, what's the proof for this thought?
Mm.
You don't want to open your Christmas gifts. What's the proof that everybody's looking at you? What evidence do you have? And sometimes the kids, I'll ask them like, which question, like, do you need the most? And sometimes I had this girl recently and she goes, not that one. She goes, that made it worse. She goes, when you asked me that, I asked kids to face the fear and just like, and then what? And then what? And I just keep going. And they're like, well, and then I would fail the class. Okay. And then, well, I'd have to make up the test. And a lot of times kids go, okay, yeah, that's it. Then I would make up the test and it's not a big deal. But every so often kids go, this is making it worse. So just helping them find a strategy that works for them. And then the third C is like changing the thought. And so the big thing when we're changing the thought, I tell kids, we're not going to change it. Like currently, your probably anxiety is normally worst case scenario. We're not going to change it to best case scenario because that may not be true. We want it to be a realistic thought. And so we kind of call it the most likely thought, what's in the middle. And so I did this with a boy recently. He was getting a new teacher like middle of the year and he was really nervous about it. And I said, okay, we're like, you're thinking worst case scenario. Let's like write down some of your fears. And we did a little chart and he goes, yeah, like she'll give me hard homework and she's going to give me homework every night, and he made a list. And then I said, well, let's go to best case scenario. And I mean, he was like laughing about it. He's like, yeah, she'll let me play video games and, oh, she'll make me cookies. And we were like, yeah, like we had a good time making that, that best case scenario. And then we came back to the realistic and he goes, she's probably just going to be like my other teacher. Like, and so I think that kind of helped change the perspective, right? Change how we're looking at a situation. Um, so I like the three C's to just kind of help kids break it down. And sometimes I'll teach it like one C at a time. And other times it just depends. Like I might be able to do it at once, just kind of a quick little lesson.
I
Um,
love I love that you're able to do that with middle school. I'm almost envious because I feel like in elementary it's harder because that rational piece isn't always there, but just the reasoning, like you can just sit down and talk it out. Best case scenario, worst case scenario, let's find the middle. And just watching the kids come to those conclusions on their own and having that light bulb moment is so awesome.
oh, it is. It is. Yeah, I was like, I could see how like elementary, it's just so much different. But yeah, middle school, I'm able to like, and that really is the best way for her to handle anxiety in middle school because I can't just do a breathing strategy anymore because your mind, I actually tell one of the visuals I give kids is I call it a snowball thought and how a snowball starts off small, but as it rolls down a hill, it just gets bigger. And so, we have to catch that snowball before it gets huge and it turns into this big old problem. And so, yeah, it does like they're able to start processing it. And to me, if they can learn it now, they're going to be so much better in high school, college, and as adults.
Yeah, it's so empowering to know that they have, control over their thoughts and their actions.
Yes. Yes.
Uh, I do something similar with elementary with like a spiral, tornado spiral is the visual. So, it's how you kind of identify your worst case scenario. So they're like, well, then, I'm going to fail the test and then I'm going to fail the class and then I'm going to, not finish, not graduate high school and then I'm going to be homeless and then, whatever
Yes.
crazy spiral. And then you kind of catch it earlier on. Like, okay, where did we veer to unrealistic?
Yes. I call that the what if poem. I have a what if poem and then like, what if I forget my pencil? Then this, and then what if like, and it goes on and on. And I did it with a group I had, and the girls go, "Oh, I write these for fun," and I was like, "No." I was like, "I don't think that we should like
Yeah,
promote writing these." I said it's meant to help you identify. And she
right.
was like, "But that little girl," she goes, "No, it helps me realize like I'm being a little crazy." She goes, "It
Right. It's
helps
kind
me." I
of
was
silly.
like, "Okay, whatever works for you."
That's funny. I
Yeah.
love these. Do you have any other strategies that you're using now?
Um, I've done, I also do like, I teach different, just I do focus on like breathing strategies, and I do that as well because in the moment that does help. So I do teach students that, and they all like different things. So, I do like the finger breathing where it's like you trace your other hand with your pointer finger and you kind of breathe in and breathe out when you go down. So I do finger breathing. I did muscle relaxation with a group recently and surprised by how much they liked it. I just wasn't sure. I was like, I don't know how this is gonna go. I mean, it can't hurt. Let's teach them and see how it goes. And they surprisingly out of like we did a whole day of just different strategies. And then at the end I asked which three did you like best today? And all of the kids picked muscle relaxation. I thought it was so interesting. Another thing I like to do is I like to ask kids like what's like to focus on your success, like what's something you've overcome that maybe we forget about, right? Like I tell kids, like we tend to forget about like our proud moments and the things that we've already overcome. So I ask them to like really sit down and think about that and write it down so that, if you've overcome that, you can overcome this. And that I feel like that's a good tool too, because I think kids do forget about, their strengths sometimes. I think they can be hard on themselves. And so I think it's good to just remind them like you are strong and you have done all these other things.
Right. No, I love that. And I like that you mentioned the deep breathing too, because it really just depends how you're seeing them in what state, right? If they're coming in and they're like hyperventilating, they're not really going to be ready to, write down their previous wins or talk about worst case scenario. First, we have to get them to like a place where they can talk.
Yes.
But like
Yes.
you like to catch them kind of earlier before.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm all about the preventative. That was actually going to be my next question was what preventative strategies do you teach? I wasn't sure if you were doing class lessons at the middle school level.
We do, but we actually, I create lessons at middle school and then our teachers, I push it out to them to do during like their homeroom advisory class. And then I do float around and do lessons every so often, but it just takes so long because I only get that one period to do it. And so it's like it'll take me, I think, like 5 weeks to do a lesson for one grade level. So and then I've got like the others. So this year we started doing I think it's like once a month on like Tuesdays, they have different counselor theme lessons. Like the first Tuesday is career, right? So we do a career lesson. The second Tuesday is about like acceptance and differences in others. And the third Tuesday is self-care. And so each time we're teaching them things like deep breathing, um, even like the importance of like healthy eating. Um, and actually, one of the lessons is about like what's in your control and out of your control. So we do have those that we've put in there. And I feel like that's a little bit preventative because I feel like, honestly, I feel like everybody can benefit from some of these skills because we're all going to have a time when maybe we're not anxious, but maybe we're stressed. And it really does look the same in how we're treating it. So, um, yeah, I think teaching those skills. I also think a big thing to be preventative is working with kids on like identifying their emotions. Um, I heard once at a training I went to, like, if you can't identify how you're feeling, you can't identify the problem because we're not in touch with our feelings. So like the first step is like, I'm feeling sad. What's making me feel this way? And then problem solving. And so I've had kids tell me, like I had a student tell me the other day, like I'm nervous about blank. And we started talking and I pulled out my emotions chart that I have. And I was like, I'm not sure you're nervous. Like, let's look at this and see if there's other words. And yeah, I think they were much more like sad,
Mhm.
overwhelmed, completely different emotions. And so I think a big thing is first just helping kids identify like how are you feeling.
I love that. That's something also I feel like we teach one time when they're little, and then we're like, okay, they got it. They're good. Like they're old.
Mhm.
But even as adults, I mean, like you said, sometimes we're misinterpreting our emotions, labeling them as something else. Sometimes emotions have, the same kind of like symptoms, like you may be exhibiting something, the same response to two completely different emotions. But yes, I think that's so important. And sometimes it feels, as counselors who are always, thinking about feelings and talking about feelings, it may seem kind of like remedial to do that. But I think it's so important, even at the upper grades.
Yes, yes, definitely.
That's awesome. So my last question for you, this can be anxiety related or just in general, but we do have a lot of newer counselors who listen to the podcast. So I would like to know, what advice do you have for a new school counselor?
Um, I've got a few actually. I had somebody ask me this recently and I like really sat and thought about it. So one is, and somebody, I had to interview a counselor when I was in college, and this is what they told me, and I get it now. Find a hobby where you can physically see something at the end of it. Because in counseling, when I used to teach, I would come home and be like, everybody knows how to multiply fractions now, right? Like I had visually seen a task, but sometimes when you come home from counseling, you come home and go, I don't know what I did. I don't know if anybody heard me today. I don't know if I made any progress. Like you don't necessarily see the fruits of your labor, and you may not see it for a very long time in some kids. A conversation you have today may finally come to fruit, like click for them in 3 years.
Mhm.
And so just a hobby where you, or some summer self-care where you can physically see a product. So like gardening, even cleaning. Some days I come home to my house and I just sweep the floor because I can visibly see I have done something today. Um, I think also like a big thing is accepting your circle of control as a counselor. We teach kids this, and you just need to like give when there's a difficult situation, a lot of counselors will take it home and just it just goes over in your head. And there's always going to be cases that do, but as much as you can, try to tell yourself, I gave it my all. And at the end of the day, there's nothing else I can do about it, because as long as you tried everything, leave it at work. Like we can't keep circling and circling through things, because at the end of the day, most of the things that we're worried about are outside of our control. Um, Another thing I do is on a rough day, maybe I've met with an angry parent or something, I try to grab a favorite. And we have those kids where when we meet with them, we just feel like we're making progress or we're helping them. And so I try to just grab one of them and remind myself like this is why I'm doing this, and it like kind of re-inspires me, right? Like maybe like that parent was yelling at me, or I don't know, I went to a meeting and they were like, you're behind on your blah blah blahs. I don't know. It just meeting with a kid always reminds me of like why I'm doing this, and so it helps put my focus back in perspective. um Let's see what else. Try new things. Like I told you earlier, like I didn't know if muscle relaxation was going to work with sixth graders. And it did. Like I feel like work is going to get boring if we're not trying new things. And sometimes I feel like it doesn't work out. Like I did a lesson once where I was painting. I'm not an elementary teacher. I don't really know how to paint with kids. Like I was like, okay, here's some napkins, and y'all, we were painting rocks, and I'll never forget because this girl's rock rolled onto some other kid's like seat. The kid sat down. It was after Christmas, so of course it was like this girl's new jeans. Like paint was everywhere. It was a disaster. And I was like, oh, I'm not painting again. Like
Learned that I'm not doing that again.
yeah, I was like, ooh. But then it was interesting. The following year, it was a grief group that I was doing, and I met with one of the same girls was in it. And she goes, oh, what about, she mentioned that lesson and she could still remember the purpose of it. And she goes, I still have my painted rock, it ground. And she like could like, I was like, okay, so even though sometimes you might think something fails, like just try it out. You never know how it's going to turn out. And if it's bad, I mean, just wing it. We're counselors. We used to all be teachers. Most of us used to be teachers. Just wing it, just be like, oh, I tell kids, I go, well, that was kind of boring, huh? But at least you're trying new stuff.
Yeah, and I think the kids can tell, right? I mean, if you're getting bored of your lessons, they are likely getting bored of them too. So I
Yes.
love to try something new. I feel like when we come in with like, oh, this is a new game, and you're like enthusiastic, then everyone benefits more. You remember
Yes.
content and everything.
I agree. Yeah, and I definitely have like my go-to stuff that I do, but I still, yeah, like even somebody told me recently, like to check in with kids using that what do you meme game?
Oh, yeah.
To ask the kid to pick a meme card for how they're doing. And
Oh,
I was like, oh, that's cool. And so it's great. And then actually I get great conversations from it that normally like wouldn't have come up, you know.
right.
So yeah, trying new stuff is just it makes it fun for me. It makes it fun for them. Yeah, I love it.
I love that. That's some really good advice. Well, this has been great, Jessica. Thank you for sharing with us today. Where can the listeners find you if they have some follow-up questions or want to connect?
Um, I have like I don't know. I guess I have Instagram. It's counseling adventures, because I'm trying to find new things in counseling, and that's kind of it's kind of keeping me inspired. And so you can find me on there. And I also have a little website that I again, it's honestly just like me trying to get out my like creative juices a little bit. And it's counselingadventures.com.
Perfect. We will link to that in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time. I know the counselors are going to learn so much from this episode.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
I hope you loved this episode with Jessica. It's funny, she mentioned that a lot of counselors are teachers formerly, but that's not the case for me and for many counselors I know. I think that maybe is a requirement in Texas. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I know some districts and some states like counselors to have a teaching background. But in my experience, I had zero teaching background, and that's what made class lessons a struggle for me. I had to learn classroom management strategies and different tools to use to engage students, manage behaviors while teaching my counseling lesson. Anyways, I've learned a lot over the years, and I want to share it with you. That's why I want you to come to this month's Coffee with the Counselor. We're going to be talking about how to teach when you're not a teacher, a classroom lessons survival guide. If you feel like you need this topic, you're going to love this one. Go to stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/coffee to save your seat. I hope to see you there.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.